Question 1. Stakeholder feedback indicates a potential gap in Booz Allen Hamilton's internal data handling procedures concerning the secure storage of client-sensitive information. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Booz Allen Hamilton's obligations under U.S. federal regulatory frameworks and ethical contracting principles? Option A. Dismiss the feedback as a potential misunderstanding and continue with current data handling procedures, assuming they meet all regulatory requirements. Option B. Share specific examples of current data handling practices with the stakeholders to demonstrate compliance, without first consulting legal or compliance teams. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the stakeholder feedback, cross-referencing it with existing Booz Allen Hamilton policies and applicable U.S. federal regulations, e.g., NIST, FAR, to identify any compliance discrepancies, and then develop a compliant remediation plan. Option D. Immediately revise internal data handling procedures to address the feedback, ensuring all revisions are documented and reviewed by the Compliance Department for adherence to relevant U.S. federal regulations. The correct answer is D. Immediately revise internal data handling procedures to address the feedback, ensuring all revisions are documented and reviewed by the Compliance Department for adherence to relevant U.S. federal regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Booz Allen Hamilton, as a government contractor, operates under stringent regulatory frameworks that govern data handling, cybersecurity, and ethical conduct. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the need to respond to stakeholder feedback with the absolute requirement to adhere to all applicable laws and regulations, particularly those related to data privacy and security. A misstep could lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of client trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any action taken is not only responsive, but also compliant. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process of reviewing the feedback against existing policies and regulatory requirements. This ensures that any proposed changes or responses are vetted for compliance before implementation. Specifically, it requires engaging the appropriate internal compliance and legal teams to assess the feedback's implications under relevant U.S. federal regulations, e.g., NIST guidelines, FAR clauses, potentially CMMC requirements if applicable to the contract. This methodical review, followed by a compliant action plan, is the cornerstone of responsible corporate governance and regulatory adherence for a company like Booz Allen Hamilton operating in the U.S. federal contracting space. An incorrect approach that involves immediately implementing changes based solely on stakeholder feedback without a compliance review is professionally unacceptable. This bypasses critical regulatory checks and could lead to the introduction of non-compliant practices, data breaches, or violations of contractual obligations. Another incorrect approach, which is to dismiss the feedback entirely without any form of review, fails to uphold ethical standards of responsiveness and continuous improvement, and could also inadvertently overlook a genuine compliance issue that the feedback highlights. Finally, an approach that involves sharing sensitive internal data with stakeholders to address feedback without proper authorization or anonymization would be a severe regulatory and ethical failure, potentially violating data privacy laws and contractual confidentiality agreements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This framework involves 1. Acknowledging and documenting all stakeholder feedback. 2. Assessing the feedback's nature and potential implications, particularly concerning regulatory requirements and contractual obligations. 3. Consulting with internal legal, compliance, and relevant subject matter experts to determine the appropriate course of action. 4. Developing and implementing a response or corrective action plan that is fully compliant with all applicable laws, regulations, and contractual terms. 5. Documenting the entire process for audit and accountability. Question 2. Performance analysis shows that a key client at Booz Allen Hamilton has requested a specific type of data analysis that, while technically feasible, appears to skirt the edges of data privacy regulations and Booz Allen Hamilton's internal ethical guidelines regarding client data handling. The client is insistent, stating it's crucial for their competitive advantage. Option A. Proceed with the client's request, assuming the risk is minimal and that the client's insistence justifies the action, without further internal consultation. Option B. Attempt to subtly modify the data processing to appear compliant while still delivering the outcome the client desires, without explicitly informing the client of the modification. Option C. Inform the client that the request cannot be fulfilled as stated due to potential conflicts with data privacy regulations and Booz Allen Hamilton's ethical standards, and offer to explore alternative compliant methods for achieving their objective. Option D. Immediately cease all work with the client and report the incident to external regulatory bodies without consulting internal Booz Allen Hamilton ethics or legal departments. The correct answer is C. Inform the client that the request cannot be fulfilled as stated due to potential conflicts with data privacy regulations and Booz Allen Hamilton's ethical standards, and offer to explore alternative compliant methods for achieving their objective. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at Booz Allen Hamilton to navigate a conflict between a client's request and established ethical guidelines and regulatory compliance. The pressure to satisfy a client, especially one that may be significant, can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential ethical breaches. Careful judgment is required to uphold the integrity of Booz Allen Hamilton's operations and its commitment to ethical conduct, even when faced with client demands that might seem minor or justifiable from a client's perspective. The correct approach involves prioritizing adherence to Booz Allen Hamilton's internal code of conduct and relevant regulatory frameworks over the client's immediate, potentially problematic request. This means clearly communicating to the client that the request cannot be fulfilled as stated due to ethical or regulatory concerns. The justification for this approach lies in the fundamental principles of professional ethics, which mandate honesty, integrity, and compliance with laws and regulations. For Booz Allen Hamilton, maintaining client trust and its reputation as a responsible consulting firm hinges on demonstrating an unwavering commitment to these principles. Failing to do so could lead to legal repercussions, reputational damage, and a loss of client confidence. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the client's request without proper escalation or consideration of the ethical implications. This failure stems from a disregard for the established ethical framework and potentially applicable regulations. It prioritizes short-term client satisfaction over long-term professional integrity and legal compliance. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to subtly circumvent the ethical guidelines or regulations to fulfill the client's request. This demonstrates a lack of transparency and honesty, which are core ethical tenets. Such action, even if not overtly illegal, erode trust and can lead to significant reputational harm and potential disciplinary action. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of Booz Allen Hamilton's code of conduct and any relevant regulatory requirements. When faced with a request that raises ethical or compliance concerns, the professional should first pause and assess the situation against these established standards. If a conflict is identified, the next step is to communicate the concerns clearly and professionally to the client, explaining the limitations imposed by ethical or regulatory obligations. If the client insists, the professional must then escalate the issue internally to their manager or the appropriate ethics compliance department for guidance and resolution. This structured approach ensures that decisions are made with integrity, transparency, and in accordance with professional and legal obligations. Question 3. Market research demonstrates that Booz Allen Hamilton is advising a financial services client on a new market entry strategy for a novel digital asset product. Given the evolving regulatory landscape for digital assets in the United States, which of the following approaches best ensures compliance and mitigates risk for the client? Option A. Proceed with the market entry strategy based on the assumption that existing regulations for traditional financial products will adequately cover the new digital asset product and address any potential regulatory concerns post-launch. Option B. Adopt a market entry strategy that has been successfully implemented by similar companies in other jurisdictions, assuming that U.S. regulations will be largely comparable. Option C. Proactively engage with relevant U.S. regulatory bodies, e.g., SEC, CFTC, FinCEN, and specialized legal counsel to interpret applicable regulations and seek guidance on the proposed product structure and operational framework before finalizing the market entry strategy. Option D. Rely exclusively on the client's internal legal department's assessment of U.S. digital asset regulations, assuming their expertise is sufficient to cover all compliance aspects. The correct answer is C. Proactively engage with relevant U.S. regulatory bodies, e.g., SEC, CFTC, FinCEN, and specialized legal counsel to interpret applicable regulations and seek guidance on the proposed product structure and operational framework before finalizing the market entry strategy. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Booz Allen Hamilton consultants tasked with advising a client on a new market entry strategy. The core difficulty lies in balancing aggressive business objectives with the stringent regulatory compliance requirements of the financial services industry. Misinterpreting or overlooking regulatory nuances can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and operational disruption for the client, directly impacting Booz Allen Hamilton's credibility and future business. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the proposed strategy is not only commercially viable, but also fully compliant with all applicable laws and guidelines. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough and proactive engagement with the relevant regulatory bodies and legal counsel to understand and interpret the specific requirements for the client's proposed market entry. This demonstrates a commitment to due diligence and a deep understanding of the regulatory landscape. By seeking clarification and ensuring alignment with regulatory expectations from the outset, Booz Allen Hamilton acts as a responsible advisor, mitigating risks for the client and upholding professional standards. This aligns with the principles of ethical conduct and regulatory adherence expected of consulting firms operating within regulated sectors, ensuring that advice is both strategic and legally sound. Incorrect approach is analysis. Adopting a strategy that prioritizes speed to market over comprehensive regulatory review poses a significant risk. This approach fails to acknowledge the critical importance of compliance in the financial services sector. It could lead to the client inadvertently violating regulations, resulting in fines, sanctions, and reputational harm. Furthermore, it demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility on the part of the consultants, who are expected to provide advice that is not only effective but also lawful. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the client's internal legal team's interpretation of regulations, without independent verification or consultation with external experts. While the client's legal team has a vested interest, their interpretation might be influenced by internal pressures or may not encompass the full breadth of regulatory nuances. This can lead to a false sense of security and potential noncompliance. Finally, assuming that existing market entry strategies for similar products in other jurisdictions are directly transferable without specific regulatory assessment for the target market is a dangerous oversight. Regulatory frameworks are jurisdiction-specific, and what is permissible in one country may be strictly prohibited in another. This approach ignores the fundamental principle of regulatory localization and can result in severe legal and financial repercussions. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with advising clients in regulated industries must adopt a risk-aware and compliance-first mindset. The decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying all relevant regulatory bodies and legal frameworks applicable to the client's proposed activities. 2. Conducting thorough due diligence to understand the specific requirements, restrictions, and reporting obligations. 3. Engaging with legal counsel and regulatory experts for clarification and validation of interpretations. 4. Integrating compliance considerations into the strategic planning process from the earliest stages. 5. Documenting all regulatory assessments and decisions to ensure transparency and accountability. This systematic approach ensures that advice provided is robust, defensible, and aligned with both business objectives and legal obligations. Question 4. Benchmark analysis indicates that Booz Allen Hamilton is advising a client on a new data analytics platform. The client is eager to deploy the platform quickly to gain a competitive advantage. However, the proposed platform involves the processing of sensitive personal data, and Booz Allen Hamilton must ensure its recommendations align with all applicable U.S. federal and state data privacy laws. Which of the following approaches best demonstrates professional responsibility and regulatory compliance in this scenario? Option A. Prioritize the client's desire for rapid deployment by implementing the platform with minimal regulatory review, assuming that standard data security measures will suffice. Option B. Focus on the technical capabilities of the platform and its ability to meet the client's business objectives, addressing regulatory concerns only if explicitly raised by the client or a regulatory body. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of all relevant U.S. federal and state data privacy laws, Identify specific requirements for personal data processing, and ensure the platform's design and implementation fully adhere to these mandates before recommending deployment. Option D. Selectively interpret U.S. federal and state data privacy laws, focusing only on those provisions that support the client's immediate deployment goals and downplaying any conflicting requirements. The correct answer is A. Prioritize the client's desire for rapid deployment by implementing the platform with minimal regulatory review, assuming that standard data security measures will suffice. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Booz Allen Hamilton, as a consulting firm, is entrusted with sensitive client information and is expected to uphold the highest ethical standards and regulatory compliance. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the need to provide comprehensive and accurate advice to a client with the imperative to adhere strictly to the regulatory framework governing their operations, particularly concerning data handling and reporting. Misinterpreting or selectively applying regulations can lead to significant legal repercussions, reputational damage, and a breach of client trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all recommendations are not only strategically sound, but also legally defensible and ethically responsible within the specified regulatory environment. The correct approach involves a thorough and systematic review of all applicable regulations, identifying specific requirements related to the client's data and the proposed solution. This approach prioritizes a comprehensive understanding of the regulatory landscape before formulating advice. It ensures that Booz Allen Hamilton's recommendations are grounded in compliance, mitigating risks for both the firm and the client. The regulatory justification for this approach stems from the fundamental principle of due diligence and the duty of care owed to clients. Professionals are expected to be knowledgeable about the laws and regulations relevant to their field and to act in a manner that upholds them. Failing to do so can result in penalties, sanctions, and civil liability. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the client's stated objectives, without a parallel rigorous regulatory review, is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the legal and ethical obligations that underpin consulting engagements. It risks exposing the client to noncompliance penalties and can lead to the implementation of solutions that are ultimately unviable or illegal. Another incorrect approach that involves cherry-picking regulations that support the desired outcome, while ignoring those that present obstacles, is a direct violation of ethical principles and regulatory intent. This demonstrates a lack of integrity and a willingness to circumvent established rules for expediency, which is a serious ethical breach. A third incorrect approach that relies on assumptions about regulatory interpretation without seeking clarification or expert legal counsel is also professionally unsound. This can lead to misinterpretations that have severe consequences, highlighting a failure in risk management and professional diligence. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured framework that begins with a clear understanding of the client's needs and objectives. This should be immediately followed by a comprehensive identification and analysis of all relevant legal and regulatory requirements. Where ambiguity exists, seeking clarification from legal counsel or regulatory bodies is paramount. The proposed solutions must then be evaluated against these regulatory requirements, ensuring full compliance. Finally, all recommendations should be documented with clear justifications, including how they align with regulatory mandates, to provide a transparent and defensible basis for the advice given. Question 5. The audit findings indicate a potential misstatement in the project cost allocation for a key Booz Allen Hamilton client. While the finding appears to be a minor discrepancy, the project manager is concerned about the potential impact on client perception and the upcoming project review. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Booz Allen Hamilton team? Option A. Advise the project manager to adjust the cost allocation internally to align with expectations without informing the client to avoid any negative perception. Option B. Instruct the audit team to reevaluate the finding to determine if it can be classified as immaterial and therefore not require client notification. Option C. Immediately inform the client of the potential misstatement and initiate a joint review to determine the exact nature and impact of the discrepancy, proposing a clear remediation plan. Option D. Delay informing the client until a more comprehensive internal investigation is completed, even if it means missing the project review deadline for full disclosure. The correct answer is C. Immediately inform the client of the potential misstatement and initiate a joint review to determine the exact nature and impact of the discrepancy, proposing a clear remediation plan. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing Booz Allen Hamilton's commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance with the immediate pressure to resolve an audit finding that could impact client relationships and project timelines. The core of the dilemma lies in determining the appropriate response when a potential misstatement is identified, and the urgency to address it conflicts with the need for thoroughness and integrity. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the resolution upholds professional standards without creating undue alarm or compromising the accuracy of reporting. The correct approach involves a transparent and collaborative process of investigating the audit finding. This means acknowledging the finding, initiating a thorough review to confirm its validity and scope, and then engaging with the client to discuss the implications and the proposed remediation plan. This approach is right because it aligns with fundamental ethical principles of honesty, integrity, and due care, as well as regulatory expectations for accurate financial reporting and client communication. Specifically, it adheres to the principles of professional skepticism and due diligence expected of consultants. By proactively addressing the issue with the client, Booz Allen Hamilton demonstrates accountability and a commitment to resolving discrepancies, thereby maintaining trust and reinforcing its reputation for ethical business practices. An incorrect approach would be to downplay or ignore the audit finding. This is professionally unacceptable because it violates the ethical duty of candor and integrity. Failing to investigate or report a potential misstatement, even if it seems minor, can lead to inaccurate financial reporting, which has legal and reputational consequences. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately implement a corrective action without fully understanding the root cause or scope of the finding. This could lead to an ineffective or even counterproductive solution, potentially masking underlying systemic issues and failing to satisfy regulatory requirements for proper remediation. Furthermore, withholding information from the client about a significant audit finding until it is unavoidable is a breach of trust and professional responsibility. Professionals should approach such situations by first activating their professional skepticism to critically evaluate the audit finding. This involves gathering all relevant information, understanding the context, and assessing the potential impact. The next step is to consult internal policies and relevant professional standards to guide the decision-making process. Open and honest communication with both internal stakeholders and the client is paramount. A structured approach involving investigation, assessment, communication, and remediation ensures that issues are addressed systematically and ethically, fostering a culture of accountability and continuous improvement within Booz Allen Hamilton. Question 6. Strategic planning requires Booz Allen Hamilton to assess a client's operational adherence to U.S. federal regulations concerning data privacy. During a review, a consultant identifies a potential discrepancy in the client's data handling practices that may not fully align with the requirements of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA. The consultant is concerned about the potential implications for the client and Booz Allen Hamilton. Which of the following approaches best represents the ethically and professionally responsible course of action for the Booz Allen Hamilton consultant? Option A. Conduct a thorough internal review of the identified discrepancy. Consult with Booz Allen Hamilton's legal and compliance teams, and then engage the client to discuss the findings and potential remediation strategies. Option B. Immediately report the potential HIPAA violation to the relevant U.S. regulatory authority without further consultation with the client. Option C. Recommend to the client that they ignore the discrepancy, as it may be a minor issue and reporting it could create unnecessary complications. Option D. Advise the client to adjust their data handling practices to align with HIPAA requirements and document the proposed changes internally. The correct answer is B. Immediately report the potential HIPAA violation to the relevant U.S. regulatory authority without further consultation with the client. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Booz Allen Hamilton consultants due to the inherent tension between client confidentiality and the ethical obligation to report potential noncompliance with regulatory frameworks. Navigating this requires a deep understanding of the specific regulatory landscape governing the client's industry and the professional conduct expected of Booz Allen Hamilton. The challenge lies in balancing the client's desire for discretion with the imperative to uphold legal and ethical standards, especially when sensitive information is involved. The correct approach involves a structured, multi-step process that prioritizes understanding the regulatory implications before making any definitive recommendations or disclosures. This approach begins with a thorough internal review to ascertain the exact nature and severity of the potential noncompliance, consulting relevant internal legal and compliance experts within Booz Allen Hamilton. Subsequently, it necessitates a transparent and collaborative discussion with the client, presenting the findings and potential regulatory ramifications in a clear, objective manner, and exploring remediation options. This approach is ethically sound and professionally justifiable because it respects the client relationship while proactively addressing potential risks and adhering to the spirit of regulatory compliance. It aligns with professional codes of conduct that emphasize integrity, due diligence, and responsible advice. An incorrect approach would be to immediately report the potential noncompliance to the relevant regulatory body without first engaging with the client. This would breach client confidentiality, potentially damage the professional relationship, and could be premature if the issue is a misunderstanding or can be rectified internally. It fails to uphold the principle of providing the client an opportunity to address the issue, which is often a preferred first step in regulatory engagement. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the potential noncompliance, assuming it is minor or outside the scope of Booz Allen Hamilton's responsibility. This is ethically and professionally negligent. It exposes both the client and Booz Allen Hamilton to significant legal and reputational risks. It demonstrates a failure in due diligence and a disregard for the regulatory environment in which the client operates. A third incorrect approach is to advise the client to conceal the potential noncompliance. This is not only unethical but also illegal and would expose Booz Allen Hamilton to severe penalties, including professional sanctions and potential legal liability. It directly contravenes the principles of honesty and integrity. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Fact-finding and internal assessment. Gather all relevant information and consult internal experts. 2. Risk assessment. Evaluate the potential regulatory, legal, and reputational consequences of the situation. 3. Client engagement. Discuss findings and potential solutions with the client in a transparent and constructive manner. 4. Collaborative remediation. Work with the client to develop and implement a compliant course of action. 5. Escalation if necessary. If the client is unwilling or unable to remediate, then consider appropriate reporting mechanisms in accordance with professional obligations and legal requirements. Question 7. Compliance review shows that a Booz Allen Hamilton project team is advising a client on a new market entry strategy. The client has expressed a strong preference for a particular operational model, citing anecdotal evidence from a competitor. The project lead, under pressure to deliver a favorable report quickly, is considering recommending this model without conducting a full due diligence assessment of its regulatory compliance and long-term viability within the specified jurisdiction. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Booz Allen Hamilton's professional and regulatory obligations? Option A. Conduct an independent, data-driven assessment of the proposed operational model, cross-referencing it with all applicable regulations and industry best practices within the client's jurisdiction, and present objective findings and recommendations, even if they diverge from the client's initial preference. Option B. Immediately dismiss the client's preferred operational model as potentially problematic based on the project lead's initial intuition, without undertaking any formal investigation or seeking further clarification from the client. Option C. Recommend the client's preferred operational model, emphasizing the anecdotal evidence from the competitor and downplaying the need for extensive independent verification to expedite project delivery and satisfy the client's immediate request. Option D. Selectively gather and present data that supports the client's preferred operational model, framing it as a comprehensive analysis, while omitting any information that might suggest regulatory concerns or alternative, more compliant strategies. The correct answer is A. Conduct an independent, data-driven assessment of the proposed operational model, cross-referencing it with all applicable regulations and industry best practices within the client's jurisdiction, and present objective findings and recommendations, even if they diverge from the client's initial preference. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's desire for a specific outcome and the consultant's ethical and regulatory obligations to provide objective, unbiased advice. Booz Allen Hamilton, as a consulting firm, is entrusted with client data and is expected to act in the client's best interest, but this must be balanced against adherence to applicable regulations and professional standards. The challenge lies in navigating the pressure to conform to a client's potentially misinformed or biased perspective without compromising integrity or violating compliance requirements. The correct approach involves a thorough, independent assessment of the situation, relying on verifiable data and established regulatory frameworks. This approach is right because it upholds the core principles of professional consulting: objectivity, integrity, and adherence to law. Specifically, it aligns with the expectation that consultants will provide evidence-based recommendations and will not knowingly facilitate or endorse non-compliant activities. The regulatory framework for Booz Allen Hamilton's operations, which would typically include standards of professional conduct and potentially specific industry regulations depending on the client's sector, mandates such diligence and honesty. An incorrect approach that prioritizes the client's stated preference without independent verification fails to meet these professional and regulatory standards. This could lead to the perpetuation of misinformation or the endorsement of actions that are not in the client's long-term best interest or are in violation of applicable laws. Another incorrect approach, which involves selectively presenting data to support the client's desired conclusion, constitutes a serious ethical breach and a violation of professional integrity. This misrepresents the facts and undermines the trust placed in the consultant. Finally, an approach that dismisses the client's concerns outright without a proper investigation, while perhaps well-intentioned, can damage the client relationship and may not fully address underlying issues that, if handled correctly, could lead to a compliant and beneficial outcome. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a commitment to understanding the client's objectives, followed by an independent and rigorous analysis of the facts against relevant regulatory and ethical guidelines. When discrepancies arise, the professional must clearly articulate the findings, explain the regulatory implications, and propose compliant solutions, even if they differ from the client's initial expectations. This requires courage, clear communication, and a steadfast commitment to professional ethics. Question 8. Investigation of a Booz Allen Hamilton project team's response to a client's urgent request to accelerate a critical deliverable, which requires navigating complex federal cybersecurity regulations. The client, facing internal deadlines, has asked the team to bypass a mandatory pre-approval step in the regulatory compliance checklist, citing the need for immediate deployment. The project manager is considering how to best address this request while ensuring Booz Allen Hamilton upholds its professional and ethical obligations. Option A. Engage the client in a discussion to understand the root cause of their urgency, explain the critical importance of the regulatory pre-approval step and its associated risks if bypassed, and collaboratively develop a revised, compliant timeline that incorporates the necessary review. Option B. Delegate the responsibility for the regulatory pre-approval step entirely to the client, assuming they have the internal expertise and authority to waive or expedite such requirements on their end. Option C. Proceed with the deliverable deployment as requested by the client, documenting the client's instruction to bypass the regulatory step, and inform the client of potential risks post-deployment. Option D. Immediately halt all work on the deliverable and inform the client that the regulatory pre-approval step is non-negotiable and must be completed before any further progress can be made, regardless of the client's deadlines. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the deliverable deployment as requested by the client, documenting the client's instruction to bypass the regulatory step, and inform the client of potential risks post-deployment. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's desire for rapid project completion and the ethical obligation to adhere to established regulatory compliance procedures. Booz Allen Hamilton, as a consulting firm, must balance client satisfaction with its professional responsibilities, which include ensuring all work meets the required standards and legal frameworks. The need for careful judgment arises from the potential reputational damage and legal repercussions of circumventing or inadequately addressing regulatory requirements, even under client pressure. The correct approach involves proactively engaging with the client to explain the necessity of the regulatory review process, highlighting the risks associated with noncompliance, and proposing a realistic timeline that incorporates these essential steps. This demonstrates a commitment to both client success and ethical conduct. Specifically, adherence to the regulatory framework governing the project's domain, assuming a U.S. federal context for Booz Allen Hamilton's typical engagements, mandates that all deliverables and processes undergo appropriate scrutiny. This includes, but is not limited to, relevant federal acquisition regulations, FAR, and agency-specific directives that govern the procurement and execution of consulting services. By prioritizing regulatory compliance, Booz Allen Hamilton upholds its professional integrity and protects both itself and the client from potential penalties, project delays due to rework, or even contract termination. An incorrect approach would be to agree to the client's expedited timeline without adequately addressing the regulatory review. This would represent a failure to uphold professional due diligence and a disregard for the established legal and ethical standards. Such an action could lead to the submission of non-compliant deliverables, exposing Booz Allen Hamilton to accusations of negligence or even fraud. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to streamline the regulatory review process by omitting critical steps or relying on assumptions without proper verification. This undermines the integrity of the review and could result in significant oversights that later surface, causing greater disruption and damage. A third incorrect approach would be to defer the entire responsibility for regulatory compliance solely to the client, without offering guidance or ensuring understanding, which abdicates Booz Allen Hamilton's professional responsibility as a trusted advisor. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the applicable regulatory landscape, open and honest communication with the client about constraints and requirements, and a commitment to finding solutions that are both compliant and effective. Professionals should always err on the side of caution when regulatory compliance is at stake, prioritizing long-term integrity and risk mitigation over short-term expediency. Question 9. The efficiency study reveals potential cost savings for Booz Allen Hamilton by streamlining data aggregation processes, but the preliminary findings suggest that these savings might be achieved by reducing the granularity and frequency of certain data points, potentially impacting the precision of performance metrics. Option A. Inform senior management of the potential data integrity issues and recommend halting the efficiency study until a more robust data validation framework can be established. Option B. Implement the proposed data aggregation changes, prioritizing cost reduction, and address any resulting metric inaccuracies through qualitative adjustments in reporting. Option C. Proceed with the efficiency study's recommendations without further investigation, assuming that any minor data discrepancies will be overlooked by stakeholders. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of the proposed changes to assess the impact on data integrity and the reliability of performance metrics, seeking alternative methods for efficiency that preserve data quality. The correct answer is B. Implement the proposed data aggregation changes, prioritizing cost reduction, and address any resulting metric inaccuracies through qualitative adjustments in reporting. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's pursuit of efficiency and cost savings with the ethical obligation to maintain data integrity and avoid misleading stakeholders. The Booz Allen Hamilton hiring assessment test likely evaluates a candidate's ability to navigate such conflicts by adhering to professional standards and regulatory expectations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed efficiency measures do not compromise the accuracy or reliability of the data used for decision-making or reporting. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the data collection and analysis processes to identify genuine inefficiencies that can be addressed without compromising data quality. This might include streamlining data entry, improving validation checks, or investing in better analytical tools. The ethical and regulatory justification for this approach lies in the principle of data integrity, which is fundamental to responsible business practices and often underpinned by various regulations, depending on the specific industry and jurisdiction, which for this exam is assumed to be U.S. federal guidelines for government contractors. Maintaining accurate data ensures that decisions are based on sound information, preventing potential financial losses, reputational damage, or noncompliance with reporting requirements. It upholds the duty of care owed to clients and stakeholders. An incorrect approach that involves selectively omitting or altering data to present a more favorable, albeit inaccurate, picture of efficiency is ethically and regulatorily unsound. This constitutes data manipulation, which can lead to flawed decision-making, misrepresentation of performance, and potential violations of regulations governing data accuracy and reporting. Such actions erode trust and can have severe legal and financial repercussions. Another incorrect approach, which is to proceed with the efficiency study's recommendations without independent verification of the data's accuracy, fails to exercise due diligence. This oversight can perpetuate existing data inaccuracies or introduce new ones, leading to misguided strategic choices. It demonstrates a lack of professional skepticism and a failure to uphold the responsibility to ensure the reliability of information used in business operations. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Identify the core issue. Recognize the conflict between efficiency goals and data integrity. 2. Gather information. Understand the proposed efficiency measures and their potential impact on data. 3. Consult relevant standards. Refer to internal policies, professional codes of conduct, and applicable regulations regarding data management and reporting. 4. Evaluate alternatives. Consider various solutions that achieve efficiency without compromising data quality. 5. Seek expert advice. If necessary, consult with data governance specialists or legal counsel. 6. Document decisions. Maintain clear records of the decision-making process and the rationale behind the chosen course of action. 7. Communicate transparently. Ensure all stakeholders are informed about the findings and the implemented solutions. Question 10. The evaluation methodology shows that a Booz Allen Hamilton consultant, while working on a sensitive government project, discovers evidence suggesting a client executive may be intentionally misrepresenting critical project data to secure additional funding. The consultant is concerned this misrepresentation could lead to significant financial waste and potentially compromise national security. What is the most ethically and professionally responsible course of action for the consultant to take? Option A. Immediately report the suspected misrepresentation to the relevant government oversight agency without informing anyone at Booz Allen Hamilton. Option B. Confront the client executive directly to understand their motivations and explain the potential consequences of their actions. Option C. Gather further evidence independently and discreetly. Then report the findings to Booz Allen Hamilton's internal legal and compliance departments for investigation and guidance. Option D. Discuss the suspicions with a trusted colleague outside of the project team to get their opinion on how to proceed. The correct answer is A. Immediately report the suspected misrepresentation to the relevant government oversight agency without informing anyone at Booz Allen Hamilton. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing client confidentiality with the obligation to report potential misconduct that could harm the public interest. Booz Allen Hamilton, as a consulting firm, operates under strict ethical codes and regulatory frameworks that govern its interactions with clients and the broader public. The dilemma lies in determining when and how to escalate concerns about a client's actions without violating contractual obligations or client trust prematurely, while still upholding professional integrity and legal responsibilities. Careful judgment is required to assess the severity of the potential harm, the certainty of the misconduct, and the appropriate channels for reporting. The correct approach involves a structured, internal escalation process that prioritizes gathering sufficient evidence and consulting with appropriate internal stakeholders before taking external action. This approach is correct because it aligns with common professional ethical guidelines and regulatory expectations for firms like Booz Allen Hamilton. It demonstrates a commitment to due diligence, responsible whistleblowing, and adherence to internal policies designed to manage risk and ensure compliance. By first seeking guidance from legal counsel and compliance officers, the employee ensures that any subsequent actions are legally sound and ethically defensible, minimizing personal and organizational liability while maximizing the chances of addressing the issue effectively. This process respects client relationships while prioritizing the public good and regulatory adherence. An incorrect approach would be to immediately report the suspected misconduct to external authorities without internal consultation. This failure stems from a disregard for established internal reporting protocols and potentially breaches client confidentiality agreements prematurely. It can lead to unsubstantiated accusations, damage the firm's reputation, and create legal complications. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the suspected misconduct due to fear of reprisal or a desire to maintain a positive client relationship. This failure represents a dereliction of professional duty and ethical responsibility, potentially exposing the firm and the public to significant harm. It also violates the implicit trust placed in professionals to act with integrity. A third incorrect approach would be to discuss the suspected misconduct with colleagues outside of the designated reporting channels. This breaches confidentiality, can lead to the spread of rumors, and undermines the integrity of the internal investigation process. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the nature and potential impact of the suspected misconduct. This should be followed by a thorough review of relevant company policies, ethical codes, and applicable regulations. The next step is to consult with internal compliance, legal, or ethics departments to seek guidance on the appropriate course of action. This structured approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with both professional standards and legal requirements, while also protecting the interests of all stakeholders. Question 11. When evaluating a request from a Booz Allen Hamilton client to share specific, non-public operational data with a third party for what the client claims is a strategic partnership opportunity, what is the most ethically and legally sound approach for a Booz Allen Hamilton employee? Option A. Escalate the request to the Booz Allen Hamilton legal and compliance departments for review and guidance before responding to the client. Option B. Share the data with the client's designated third party after obtaining verbal confirmation from the client's project manager. Option C. Immediately refuse the request, citing confidentiality concerns without further discussion. Option D. Fulfill the client's request to share the data, assuming the client has the authority to authorize such sharing. The correct answer is C. Immediately refuse the request, citing confidentiality concerns without further discussion. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at Booz Allen Hamilton to navigate a conflict between a client's request and ethical obligations, specifically concerning the responsible handling of sensitive information. The pressure to satisfy a client, especially a significant one, can create a temptation to overlook or downplay ethical considerations. Careful judgment is required to uphold professional integrity and regulatory compliance. The correct approach involves prioritizing the ethical obligation to protect client confidentiality and adhere to Booz Allen Hamilton's internal policies and relevant regulations. This approach is right because it directly addresses the potential breach of trust and the legal ramifications of unauthorized data disclosure. Booz Allen Hamilton, as a consulting firm, operates under strict ethical codes and likely contractual obligations that mandate safeguarding client data. Furthermore, depending on the nature of the data, various U.S. federal and state laws e.g., HIPAA for health information, various data privacy acts would prohibit or restrict its unauthorized sharing. Upholding these standards is paramount to maintaining the firm's reputation and avoiding legal penalties. An incorrect approach that involves fulfilling the client's request without further inquiry or consultation fails to recognize the potential ethical and legal implications. This approach risks violating confidentiality agreements and data privacy laws, leading to severe consequences for both the individual and Booz Allen Hamilton, including reputational damage, financial penalties, and potential legal action. Another incorrect approach, which is to immediately refuse the client without understanding the context or exploring alternatives, might be perceived as uncooperative and could damage the client relationship unnecessarily. While the ethical boundary is clear, a professional response often involves seeking to understand the client's underlying need and exploring compliant ways to assist them, if possible, or clearly and professionally explaining the limitations. A third incorrect approach, which is to seek advice from a colleague without involving appropriate internal channels or legal counsel, could lead to inconsistent advice or further compromise the situation. Professional decision-making in such sensitive matters requires adherence to established protocols for escalation and consultation, ensuring that guidance is sought from those authorized and knowledgeable in ethical and legal compliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Identifying the ethical or regulatory conflict. 2. Understanding the specific nature of the request and the data involved. 3. Consulting Booz Allen Hamilton's internal code of conduct, policies, and relevant legal counsel or compliance officers. 4. Clearly communicating any limitations or necessary procedures to the client in a professional manner. 5. Documenting the interaction and the decision-making process. Question 12. Governance review demonstrates that Booz Allen Hamilton's internal data handling procedures for a recent government contract may not fully align with the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR Subpart 4. 7. Contractor records retention. Specifically, the review highlights potential inconsistencies in the retention periods for certain project documentation. Which of the following actions represents the most appropriate and compliant response for Booz Allen Hamilton? Option A. Focus on updating the documentation for the current contract to reflect the perceived standard retention periods, while deferring a broader review of historical practices to a later date to minimize immediate disruption and cost. Option B. Immediately initiate a comprehensive review of all data retention policies and practices related to government contracts, cross-referencing them with FAR Subpart 4, 7 and other relevant federal regulations, to identify specific discrepancies and develop a detailed remediation plan with clear timelines and assigned responsibilities. Option C. Acknowledge the potential inconsistencies in the review but proceed with existing retention practices, assuming that minor deviations are unlikely to be flagged by government auditors. Option D. Instruct the project team to archive all project documentation indefinitely to ensure compliance with any potential future regulatory changes, regardless of current FAR requirements. The correct answer is B. Immediately initiate a comprehensive review of all data retention policies and practices related to government contracts, cross-referencing them with FAR Subpart 4, 7 and other relevant federal regulations to identify specific discrepancies and develop a detailed remediation plan with clear timelines and assigned responsibilities. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Booz Allen Hamilton, as a government contractor, operates under stringent regulatory frameworks that demand absolute adherence to compliance. The challenge lies in identifying and rectifying potential breaches of these regulations proactively. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between minor procedural deviations and significant compliance risks that could have severe repercussions, including contractual penalties, reputational damage, and legal action. The correct approach involves a thorough, evidence-based assessment of the governance review findings, prioritizing actions based on the severity of the identified compliance gaps and their potential impact. This aligns with the principles of robust corporate governance and regulatory adherence expected of entities handling sensitive government information and contracts. Specifically, it reflects a commitment to identifying root causes, implementing corrective actions, and establishing mechanisms for ongoing monitoring and prevention, which are fundamental to maintaining compliance with U.S. federal regulations governing government contracting and data security. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost reduction without addressing the underlying compliance issues is professionally unacceptable. This overlooks the potential for significant future financial and legal liabilities arising from non-compliance. Such an approach demonstrates a disregard for regulatory obligations and ethical responsibilities, prioritizing short-term financial gains over long-term sustainability and integrity. Another incorrect approach that involves downplaying the findings or attributing them to minor oversights without a comprehensive investigation is also professionally unsound. This can lead to the perpetuation of compliance risks and a failure to implement necessary controls. It signifies a lack of due diligence and a potential attempt to avoid accountability, which is contrary to the principles of transparency and good governance. A third incorrect approach that involves selectively addressing only those findings that are easily remediate, while ignoring more complex or resource-intensive issues, is equally problematic. This piecemeal strategy fails to achieve comprehensive compliance and leaves the organization vulnerable to the unaddressed risks. It suggests a superficial commitment to compliance rather than a genuine effort to embed it into the organizational culture and operations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This includes 1. Understanding the regulatory landscape applicable to Booz Allen Hamilton's operations. 2. Thoroughly investigating all findings from the governance review to ascertain their nature and scope. 3. Prioritizing remediation efforts based on risk level, impact, and likelihood of occurrence. 4. Developing and implementing comprehensive corrective action plans with clear ownership and timelines. 5. Establishing metrics for tracking progress and ensuring the effectiveness of implemented controls. 6. Fostering a culture of compliance through ongoing training and communication. Question 13. Analysis of a situation encountered by a Booz Allen Hamilton consultant during a client engagement where they discover information suggesting a potential violation of U.S. federal environmental regulations. The consultant is concerned about the implications for both the client and Booz Allen Hamilton's reputation and compliance standing. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the consultant to take? Option A. Discuss the findings with the client's legal counsel to understand their perspective. Option B. Share the information with other Booz Allen Hamilton team members working on the project to gather their opinions. Option C. Immediately report the suspected violation to the relevant U.S. federal environmental agency. Option D. Consult Booz Allen Hamilton's internal compliance or legal department to report the findings and seek guidance on next steps. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the suspected violation to the relevant U.S. federal environmental agency. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Booz Allen Hamilton employees due to the inherent conflict between client confidentiality and the need to report potential regulatory violations. Navigating this requires a deep understanding of the firm's ethical obligations and the relevant regulatory framework governing its operations. The core difficulty lies in balancing the duty of loyalty to the client with the broader responsibility to uphold legal and ethical standards, especially when sensitive information is involved. The correct approach involves a structured, internal reporting mechanism that prioritizes compliance and ethical conduct without immediately jeopardizing client relationships or breaching confidentiality unnecessarily. This approach is professionally sound because it adheres to established corporate governance principles and regulatory expectations for due diligence and reporting. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of responsible corporate citizenship and the legal requirement to report certain activities, while also respecting the need for internal investigation and appropriate escalation. This method ensures that potential issues are addressed systematically, minimizing risk to both the firm and its clients, and demonstrating a commitment to integrity. An incorrect approach would be to directly report the suspected violation to external authorities without first consulting Booz Allen Hamilton's internal compliance or legal departments. This failure stems from bypassing established internal protocols designed to manage such sensitive situations. Ethically, it can be seen as a breach of trust with the client, as it escalates a matter prematurely and potentially without full understanding or verification. Legally, it might also violate contractual obligations or internal policies that mandate internal reporting channels for suspected misconduct. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the information or dismiss it as insignificant without proper investigation. This is a critical ethical and regulatory failure. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of diligence and a disregard for potential wrongdoing, which can have serious consequences for all parties involved. From a regulatory standpoint, failing to investigate and report potential violations can lead to significant penalties for Booz Allen Hamilton and expose individuals to liability. It undermines the firm's commitment to a culture of compliance. A third incorrect approach involves discussing the suspected violation with colleagues outside of the designated compliance or legal channels. This creates an uncontrolled dissemination of sensitive information, increasing the risk of leaks, misinterpretations, and potential damage to client relationships and the firm's reputation. It bypasses the structured and confidential process that is essential for managing such matters responsibly and ethically. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the firm's code of conduct and reporting procedures. When faced with information suggesting a potential regulatory violation, an employee should first assess the nature and severity of the suspected issue. The next step is to consult internal resources, such as the compliance department or legal counsel, to understand the appropriate reporting channels and procedures. This ensures that actions taken are consistent with regulatory requirements, ethical standards, and internal policies, while also protecting the interests of all stakeholders. Question 14. Benchmark analysis indicates that Booz Allen Hamilton has received a significant dataset from a government client for a specific project. During the analysis, a consultant identifies a pattern that could offer substantial strategic advantages to Booz Allen Hamilton's internal business development efforts, unrelated to the current project scope. What is the most appropriate course of action for the consultant to take? Option A. Proceed with the analysis for the client project as contracted, and then independently explore the potential application of the identified pattern for Booz Allen Hamilton's benefit, ensuring data is anonymized. Option B. Immediately leverage the identified pattern for Booz Allen Hamilton's internal strategic planning, as it represents a valuable insight. Option C. Share the anonymized findings of the pattern with other Booz Allen Hamilton teams to gauge interest and potential applications for the firm's broader portfolio. Option D. Halt the current project analysis and seek explicit written consent from the government client to use the identified pattern for Booz Allen Hamilton's internal strategic planning, while also reviewing relevant contractual clauses and data usage policies. The correct answer is B. Immediately leverage the identified pattern for Booz Allen Hamilton's internal strategic planning, as it represents a valuable insight. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Booz Allen Hamilton, as a consulting firm, is entrusted with sensitive client information and is expected to uphold the highest ethical standards and regulatory compliance. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the need to provide valuable insights to a client with the imperative to protect proprietary data and adhere to contractual obligations. Careful judgment is required to navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure that the firm's actions are both legally sound and ethically defensible. The correct approach involves a thorough review of contractual agreements and relevant data privacy regulations before proceeding. This approach is best professional practice because it prioritizes compliance and risk mitigation. By understanding the specific terms of the client contract and the applicable regulatory framework, which, for Booz Allen Hamilton, would typically involve U.S. federal regulations concerning government contracting, data security, and privacy, such as those outlined by NIST, CMMC, or specific agency FAR clauses. The firm can ensure that its analysis does not inadvertently breach confidentiality or violate any legal mandates. This proactive stance demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to responsible data handling. An incorrect approach that involves immediately using the client's data for a broader, unsolicited analysis for Booz Allen Hamilton's internal strategic planning would fail ethically and regulatorily. This would likely constitute a breach of contract and potentially a violation of data privacy laws, as the data was provided for a specific purpose and not for the firm's independent commercial gain. Another incorrect approach, such as sharing the anonymized data with other Booz Allen Hamilton teams without explicit client consent or a clear contractual basis, also carries significant risks. Even with anonymization, the potential for re-identification or the misuse of insights derived from proprietary data could lead to legal repercussions and reputational damage. A third incorrect approach, which is to ignore the potential implications and proceed with the analysis as initially planned, demonstrates a severe lack of professional judgment and a disregard for regulatory and ethical obligations, exposing Booz Allen Hamilton to severe penalties. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core ethical and regulatory considerations. This involves understanding the scope of the engagement, reviewing all contractual terms, and identifying applicable laws and regulations. The next step is to assess potential risks and conflicts. If any ambiguity or potential for noncompliance exists, seeking clarification from the client and legal counsel is paramount. Finally, the decision should be based on a clear understanding of how the chosen course of action aligns with the firm's ethical code, contractual obligations, and legal responsibilities. Question 15. Benchmark analysis indicates that a prospective client for Booz Allen Hamilton has requested access to proprietary information that, while not explicitly illegal to share, could create a conflict of interest and potentially violate industry best practices for data handling. The employee receiving this request is unsure of the appropriate next steps. Which of the following represents the most professionally sound and compliant course of action for the Booz Allen Hamilton employee? Option A. Discuss the request with a peer in a different department to gauge their opinion on how to proceed. Option B. Politely decline the request without explanation, citing general company policy. Option C. Directly fulfill the client's request to demonstrate responsiveness and secure the contract. Option D. Escalate the request to Booz Allen Hamilton's internal legal and compliance departments for review and guidance before responding to the client. The correct answer is C. Directly fulfill the client's request to demonstrate responsiveness and secure the contract. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Booz Allen Hamilton employees by requiring them to navigate a situation where a potential client's request might conflict with ethical guidelines and regulatory compliance. Challenge lies in balancing the desire to secure new business with the imperative to uphold integrity and adhere to established rules. This requires careful judgment to identify potential red flags and to act in a manner that protects both the company and its stakeholders. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a proactive and ethical response. It requires the employee to recognize the potential conflict, consult internal policies and relevant regulation, and escalate the issue to the appropriate internal stakeholders, e.g., legal, compliance, or ethics department. This approach is correct because it prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory adherence over immediate business gain. It aligns with the principles of responsible corporate behavior and demonstrates a commitment to operating within legal and ethical boundaries, which is paramount for a firm like Booz Allen Hamilton that relies on trust and reputation. This also reflects a robust internal control environment, a key expectation for government contractors and large consulting firms. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that involves directly fulfilling the client's request without further inquiry or consultation is incorrect because it bypasses established ethical and regulatory safeguards. This could lead to violations of data privacy laws, conflict of interest regulations, or other compliance requirements, exposing Booz Allen Hamilton to significant legal and reputational risks. An approach that involves ignoring the request and hoping it goes away is also incorrect. This passive stance fails to address a potential ethical or regulatory issue proactively. It can be interpreted as a dereliction of duty and may still result in negative consequences if the issue is later discovered or if the client perceives the lack of response as unprofessional. An approach that involves seeking advice from colleagues outside of the designated compliance or legal channels without proper authorization is incorrect. While collaboration is valuable, seeking guidance on sensitive ethical or regulatory matters through informal channels can lead to misinterpretations, the spread of misinformation, or the inadvertent disclosure of confidential information, undermining the integrity of the decision-making process. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Booz Allen Hamilton should employ a structured decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. This framework typically involves 1. Identifying the issue and potential conflicts. 2. Consulting relevant internal policies, codes of conduct, and applicable regulations. 3. Seeking guidance from designated internal experts, e.g., compliance, legal, ethics. 4. Documenting the process and decision. 5. Acting in accordance with established guidelines and ethical principles. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are well-informed, defensible, and aligned with the company's values and legal obligations. Question 16. Research into a potential government contract opportunity for Booz Allen Hamilton reveals that a close personal friend of the lead proposal manager is a senior official within the agency issuing the request for proposal, RFP. This friend has significant influence over the evaluation criteria and selection process. What is the most appropriate course of action for the lead proposal manager and Booz Allen Hamilton? Option A. Discreetly use the personal relationship to gather insider information about the RFP's evaluation criteria and the client's preferences to strengthen the proposal. Option B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to both Booz Allen Hamilton's ethics and legal departments, as well as to the government client's contracting officer, and seek guidance on managing any potential conflict of interest. Option C. Withdraw Booz Allen Hamilton from consideration for the contract to avoid any appearance of impropriety, without further investigation or disclosure. Option D. Proceed with the proposal development, assuming the personal relationship will not influence professional judgment, and avoid mentioning it to anyone. The correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to both Booz Allen Hamilton's ethics and legal departments, as well as to the government client's contracting officer, and seek guidance on managing any potential conflict of interest. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Booz Allen Hamilton, as a government contractor, operates under stringent ethical guidelines and regulatory frameworks designed to ensure integrity, transparency, and the responsible use of taxpayer funds. The core challenge lies in balancing the pursuit of business opportunities with the absolute necessity of adhering to these regulations, particularly concerning potential conflicts of interest and the proper handling of proprietary information. Careful judgment is required to navigate situations where personal relationships might intersect with professional responsibilities, ensuring that decisions are always made in the best interest of the client and in compliance with all applicable laws and ethical standards. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent disclosure of the potential conflict of interest to the relevant internal stakeholders at Booz Allen Hamilton and the government client. This demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. By seeking guidance and adhering to established protocols for managing conflicts, Booz Allen Hamilton can ensure that the decision-making process remains objective and free from undue influence. This aligns with the principles of good governance and the expectation that government contractors will act with the highest degree of integrity. Specifically, this approach upholds the principles of transparency and accountability mandated by federal acquisition regulations and ethical codes of conduct for government contractors, which require disclosure of any circumstances that could create an appearance of impropriety or a conflict of interest. An approach that involves proceeding with the proposal without disclosing the relationship fails to uphold the required standards of transparency and integrity. This constitutes a significant ethical and regulatory failure, as it potentially compromises the objectivity of the proposal evaluation and could be perceived as an attempt to gain an unfair advantage. Such a failure violates the principles of fair competition and could lead to severe penalties, including contract termination and debarment. Another incorrect approach, which is to subtly leverage the personal relationship to gain insights into the client's evaluation criteria, represents a severe breach of ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This action not only creates a conflict of interest, but also involves the misuse of personal connections for professional gain, undermining the integrity of the procurement process. This behavior directly contravenes regulations prohibiting undue influence and unethical practices in government contracting. Finally, an approach that involves withdrawing from the proposal solely due to the personal relationship, without any attempt at disclosure or seeking guidance, might be overly cautious and could disadvantage Booz Allen Hamilton unnecessarily. While avoiding a conflict is important, a complete withdrawal without exploring mitigation strategies might not always be the most professionally sound or required course of action, especially if the conflict can be effectively managed through established procedures. The professional reasoning framework should involve identifying potential conflicts, assessing their severity, disclosing them promptly, and seeking guidance on appropriate mitigation strategies in accordance with established company policies and regulatory requirements. Question 17. The audit findings indicate potential inefficiencies in a government agency's procurement process, and Booz Allen Hamilton is tasked with presenting these findings. Which of the following represents the most appropriate approach for Booz Allen Hamilton to take when communicating these findings to the agency? Option A. Share the audit findings with a select group of agency personnel who are known to be receptive to change, encouraging them to advocate for the recommended actions internally. Option B. Proactively propose specific, detailed policy changes and operational reforms to address the identified inefficiencies, framing them as the definitive solutions derived from the audit. Option C. Delay the formal presentation of findings until further discussions can be held with agency leadership to gauge their receptiveness to potential recommendations, thereby avoiding immediate criticism. Option D. Present the audit findings objectively, detailing areas of concern and potential implications, while offering to assist the agency in developing solutions based on their strategic priorities and regulatory requirements. The correct answer is D. Present the audit findings objectively, detailing areas of concern and potential implications, while offering to assist the agency in developing solutions based on their strategic priorities and regulatory requirements. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential for Booz Allen Hamilton to be perceived as influencing or being influenced by a government client's decision-making process, particularly when the audit findings are sensitive. Maintaining objectivity and adhering to ethical guidelines is paramount to preserve the integrity of the consulting relationship and public trust. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the need to provide comprehensive and accurate information to the client with the imperative to avoid any appearance of impropriety or undue influence. The correct approach involves a structured, transparent, and documented communication strategy. This approach prioritizes providing the client with all relevant factual information derived from the audit findings, clearly delineating areas of concern and potential recommendations without dictating specific actions. It emphasizes adherence to established Booz Allen Hamilton internal policies and relevant government ethics regulations, which typically mandate impartiality and the avoidance of conflicts of interest. By presenting findings objectively and offering support for the client's decision-making process, Booz Allen Hamilton upholds its professional responsibility and ethical obligations. An incorrect approach would be to proactively suggest specific policy changes or operational adjustments based on the audit findings, without a formal request or a clear understanding of the client's strategic objectives and constraints. This could be interpreted as overstepping boundaries, potentially creating a conflict of interest, or appearing to leverage audit findings for future consulting opportunities in a manner that compromises objectivity. Another incorrect approach would be to withhold or selectively present information from the audit findings, which directly violates principles of transparency and professional integrity and could lead to regulatory scrutiny and damage to Booz Allen Hamilton's reputation. Furthermore, engaging in informal discussions with client personnel outside of established communication channels to guide their interpretation of the findings could also be seen as an attempt to exert undue influence, undermining the integrity of the audit process and the client's autonomy. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the engagement scope and relevant ethical codes and regulations. This framework involves identifying potential conflicts of interest or perceptions of impropriety early on. Next, it requires developing a communication plan that prioritizes transparency, factual accuracy, and client-centric support. Finally, it necessitates rigorous documentation of all communications and decisions to ensure accountability and provide a clear record of adherence to professional standards. Question 18. Comparative studies suggest that process optimization can significantly enhance operational efficiency for consulting firms. For Booz Allen Hamilton, when considering the implementation of a new data analytics platform to streamline client reporting, which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework governing federal contractors? Option A. Implement the platform immediately to gain a competitive advantage, relying on internal IT to manage any emergent compliance issues. Option B. Select the platform with the lowest upfront cost, assuming that most federal regulations are generic and can be adapted to the chosen solution. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of all applicable federal regulations, including data privacy, cybersecurity, and procurement integrity, to ensure the chosen platform and its implementation fully comply before deployment. Option D. Prioritize the adoption of the most advanced analytics features to ensure superior client insights, with compliance checks conducted post-implementation. Correct answer is D. Prioritize the adoption of the most advanced analytics features to ensure superior client insights, with compliance checks conducted post-implementation. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because Booz Allen Hamilton, as a government contractor, operates under stringent federal regulations and ethical guidelines designed to ensure the integrity of government operations and the responsible use of taxpayer funds. Process optimization, while beneficial, must be implemented in a manner that strictly adheres to these frameworks, particularly concerning data handling, security, and the avoidance of conflicts of interest. Careful judgment is required to balance efficiency gains with compliance obligations. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes, identification of inefficiencies, and the development of optimization strategies that are fully compliant with all applicable federal regulations, including those governing data privacy, cybersecurity, and procurement integrity. This approach prioritizes adherence to the established legal and ethical landscape, ensuring that any proposed changes do not inadvertently create vulnerabilities or violate contractual obligations. Specifically, this aligns with the principles of responsible government contracting and the ethical duty to uphold public trust, as often reinforced by federal acquisition regulations and agency-specific directives. An approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without a comprehensive compliance review risks violating federal regulations. For instance, implementing new technologies or data-sharing mechanisms without ensuring they meet cybersecurity standards, e.g., NIST guidelines, could lead to data breaches and significant penalties. Similarly, bypassing established procurement integrity rules when selecting vendors for optimization tools could result in conflicts of interest and legal challenges. An approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness in regulatory assessment can lead to non-compliance, reputational damage, and potential debarment from future government contracts. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that integrates regulatory compliance and ethical considerations from the outset of any process optimization initiative. This involves proactive engagement with legal and compliance teams, conducting thorough risk assessments that include regulatory impact, and prioritizing solutions that demonstrably meet both efficiency and compliance requirements. A phased implementation with regular audits and reviews can further mitigate risks and ensure ongoing adherence to the established frameworks. Question 19. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a new cloud-based data analytics platform could significantly reduce operational costs for Booz Allen Hamilton's government contracts. However, the platform's security protocols are not yet fully vetted against the stringent requirements of the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, FISMA, and specific agency data handling mandates, which approach best aligns with Booz Allen Hamilton's professional and regulatory obligations. Option A. Delay implementation until the platform undergoes a comprehensive security audit, including independent validation against FISMA and relevant agency data handling regulations, and any identified vulnerabilities are remediated. Option B. Negotiate with the vendor to reduce the platform's security features to align with the lower cost, prioritizing the economic benefits over strict regulatory adherence. Option C. Proceed with the implementation, assuming the platform's vendor will address any future compliance issues to realize immediate cost savings. Option D. Implement the platform with basic security measures, focusing on the cost-benefit advantage, and address any potential compliance gaps only if they are flagged by auditors. Correct answer is C. Proceed with the implementation, assuming the platform's vendor will address any future compliance issues to realize immediate cost savings. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Booz Allen Hamilton, as a government contractor, operates under strict regulatory oversight and ethical obligations. The decision to proceed with a new technology involves balancing potential benefits against significant risks, including data security, compliance with federal regulations, and maintaining client trust. A failure to adequately assess and mitigate these risks can lead to severe consequences, including contract termination, reputational damage, and legal penalties. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that prioritizes compliance with relevant federal regulations, such as those governing data privacy and cybersecurity, and aligns with Booz Allen Hamilton's internal ethical guidelines and client contractual obligations. This approach ensures that potential risks are identified, evaluated, and managed proactively, thereby safeguarding sensitive information and maintaining the integrity of operations. It demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to responsible innovation. An approach that solely focuses on the immediate cost savings without a thorough evaluation of potential security vulnerabilities and regulatory noncompliance is professionally unacceptable. This oversight could lead to breaches of federal data protection laws, such as the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, FISMA, or specific agency-level regulations, resulting in significant fines and loss of government contracts. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize rapid deployment over rigorous testing and validation of the technology's security features. This haste could expose Booz Allen Hamilton and its clients to cyber threats, violating the duty of care owed to clients and potentially contravening contractual requirements for secure system implementation. Finally, an approach that disregards the potential impact on client data privacy and confidentiality, even if the technology offers efficiency gains, is ethically unsound. Booz Allen Hamilton has a fiduciary responsibility to protect client information, and any decision that compromises this trust without robust mitigation strategies is a failure of professional judgment. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the problem and objectives. This is followed by identifying all relevant stakeholders and their concerns. Next, a thorough analysis of potential risks and benefits, considering both quantitative and qualitative factors, is crucial. This analysis must be grounded in applicable regulations, ethical principles, and organizational policies. Finally, the decision should be documented, and a plan for ongoing monitoring and evaluation should be established. Question 20. Regulatory review indicates that a potential client, a government contractor, is seeking Booz Allen Hamilton's expertise to develop a new operational strategy. The client has expressed a strong preference for a specific approach that they believe will be most efficient, but preliminary internal discussions at Booz Allen Hamilton suggest this approach may have potential compliance issues with certain federal procurement regulations. How should Booz Allen Hamilton proceed to ensure adherence to its professional standards and the implicit requirements of the Booz Allen Hamilton hiring assessment test? Option A. Immediately advise the client that their preferred approach is non-compliant and refuse to engage further without providing any alternative solutions or further analysis. Option B. Develop the operational strategy based on the client's preferred approach, assuming the client has already conducted their own due diligence and is aware of any potential regulatory implications. Option C. Conduct a thorough, independent assessment of the client's preferred strategy against all applicable federal procurement regulations and provide objective, data-driven recommendations, including any necessary modifications or alternative compliance strategies. Option D. Proceed with developing the operational strategy based on the client's preferred approach, focusing on highlighting only the aspects that appear compliant and downplaying any potential regulatory concerns to maintain client satisfaction. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough, independent assessment of the client's preferred strategy against all applicable federal procurement regulations and provide objective, data-driven recommendations, including any necessary modifications or alternative compliance strategies. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's desire for a specific outcome and the ethical and regulatory obligations of Booz Allen Hamilton to provide objective, compliant advice. The challenge lies in navigating the client's influence while upholding the integrity of the consulting process and adhering to the stringent requirements of the Booz Allen Hamilton hiring assessment test's regulatory framework, which implicitly demands adherence to professional standards and potentially specific U.S. federal regulations governing government contracting and consulting. Careful judgment is required to balance client satisfaction with the non-negotiable principles of compliance and ethical conduct. The correct approach involves prioritizing a thorough, independent assessment of the regulatory landscape and its implications for the client's proposed strategy. This approach is right because it aligns with the core principles of professional consulting, which mandate objectivity, due diligence, and the provision of advice grounded in factual analysis and regulatory compliance. Specifically, it reflects a commitment to the ethical duty of care and the regulatory requirement to operate within legal boundaries, ensuring that Booz Allen Hamilton's recommendations are not only strategically sound, but also legally defensible and compliant with all applicable laws and guidelines relevant to government contracting and consulting, as implicitly tested by the Booz Allen Hamilton hiring assessment test. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on accommodating the client's predetermined solution without independent verification would fail to meet regulatory and ethical standards. This failure stems from a lack of due diligence and a disregard for potential legal or compliance risks. It suggests a prioritization of client appeasement over professional responsibility, which could lead to the client implementing a non-compliant strategy, exposing both the client and Booz Allen Hamilton to significant penalties, reputational damage, and potential legal action. Another incorrect approach that involves selectively highlighting only the regulatory aspects that support the client's desired outcome, while omitting or downplaying contradictory information, represents a form of professional misconduct. This selective presentation is ethically unsound, as it misleads the client and violates the principle of full disclosure. It also fails to meet the implicit regulatory expectation of providing comprehensive and unbiased advice, which is crucial for informed decision-making. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly define the client's objectives. Second, conduct a comprehensive and independent review of all relevant regulatory frameworks, laws, and guidelines. Third, objectively assess the implications of these regulations on the client's objectives, identifying both opportunities and constraints. Fourth, communicate findings transparently and comprehensively to the client, clearly outlining potential risks and compliance challenges alongside any favorable aspects. Finally, recommend strategies that are both aligned with client goals and fully compliant with all applicable regulations, prioritizing ethical conduct and professional integrity throughout the engagement.